What's going on, everyone? As you can see, I'm in the classroom, crooked phone over here, paper towels, baskets over there, the way we roll, right? So we are going to talk about the background, look at some questions that you'll be answering, hopefully you'll be answering, um, after reading this short story called The Medicine Bag. And then we might get into a little bit of the medicine bag, but I got to watch the time. I don't want to go over 20 minutes. So this might take us 2 days to get through. It might take us 3 days to get through. Either way, you have this recorded. So if you're in school, great. You're watching it in school. If you're not here today, well, you have it recorded. So as I've mentioned before, trying to get into this program, it's called Savas. So it's called Savas. You can get to it through Class Link, but I think I logged in 3 times today before it actually recognized who I was. It said, sign out, you haven't been logged in for a while, but it should just automatically go right to Class Link. So just like with Red Roses, there will be copies on the back table. I'm looking at the back table right there. Boom, back table. Red Roses is still there in case anybody needs to do it. And then the medicine bag will be there probably by like Thursday because we'll be done reading and you may be working on the questions, like seven questions, which I want to preview before we actually start reading. So as we're reading, those questions can be in the back of your mind. You're like, oh, I know the answer to that one. I know a lot of times it's easier to preview the questions before you actually read the story. So let's share this. You can see it's called The Medicine Bag. So a couple things that I would like to do is go over the background. It's right here. When I click on it, it's just going to open up a little tab there. Talk briefly about the author. Sometimes the author, it's helpful to know background about the author. Other times it really kind of doesn't matter. Like with Baby Killer Unicorn, does it matter if we know a lot about the author? Probably not, seeing it's a story about fantasy. The medicine bag, however, is kind of based on some of her family members and the culture that she grew up with. So maybe it's important. If it's important or not, it's not that long. So we won't be spending a lot of time on her background, but yeah, a little bit. Don't forget, essential question. Let's highlight that. What are some milestones on the path to growing up? So these big events in your life. We've talked a lot about that. Being born, of course, is one of them, but I think that goes without saying. So first steps, maybe first words. We've talked a lot about this. Moving on or graduating from 6th grade, going to high school next year. These will be major milestones in your life. Your license. So let's look at the background here. I'm in this spot right here. Can I highlight this? Let's do it. Let's do it in yellow so everybody knows where we're at. So the Lakota Indians are part of the Sioux Nation. I would think most people have heard of the Sioux Nation. But in case you don't know, often read right next to it. So Sioux Nation, comma, you're like, what? What's the Sioux Nation? An indigenous people of the Great Plains region of North America. So a lot of times when authors or textbook writers will introduce something they think some people might have trouble with, they give a little context right after that comma. Just know, like, oh, here's another way to say Sioux Nation or a definition. I will do that on the vocabulary quizzes if you haven't noticed. I will put the blank, like the word that I'm looking for, and then right next to it, kind of another definition. So, and that's often called an appositive if you want any grammar. Most people hate grammar though, but that's what it's called. Today, there are about 170,000 Sioux Indians living in the United States. About 1/5 of the American Indian population live on reservations. What the heck's a reservation? Well, right here, which are designated pieces of land ruled by tribal law. So there are, I think they're called reservations. There are definitely um, pieces of land set aside in Maine for indigenous people, and they don't necessarily follow all of the laws of the United States. There's sometimes what they call tribal law, where I think one of the most famous examples would be, okay, if gambling is illegal in that state, but there is a reservation where there's tribal law, guess what? Gambling, it might be legal on that little piece of land right there. So a little background to the medicine bag here, written by Virginia Driving Hawk Snev, I believe is how you say her name. So let's take a little bit of a look at her right here. She was born in 1933, and I looked up on Wikipedia because Wikipedia is always right, right? Good source to use. No, most of your teachers will say don't use that thing as a source. But if you're wanting some quick information that, it's not, I'm not being tested at whether she's alive or not. I'm like, let me get a quick search here. Wikipedia says she's alive. Says she's alive still. So 1933. Not a spring chicken, we would say, but she's still alive. She grew up on Rosebud Reservation in South Dakota. Her grandmothers were storytellers, sharing traditional Sioux legend and folk tales that became an inspiration for Snev's work. She realized that American Indians were often misrepresented. Eh, Misrepresented. So, represented would be probably a good thing. Anytime you put that prefix miss in front of a word, thinking like kind of bad, like if you took a misstep, if you misstep, it means, it's a bad step. Maybe you tripped, another way to say trip. And I know certainly growing up in the 70s myself, there was this stereotype of Native Americans, like there was only one way that they were acting. And it might be, oftentimes it was, there was a reputation for people being, if you're American Indian, you were often drunk, which is obviously you would say that was a misrepresentation. Of course, just like other people, yeah, there might be some drunks around, but that's not the only thing that American Indians can be, right? Another thing is that there was a very famous commercial where it was a commercial, probably mostly for white people, right, or non-Native Americans, where the Earth was just like getting trashed. The Androscoggin River, it was just you go near it, it would stink. So in the 70s, there was a big awakening, like, oh, maybe we should take care of the Earth. Well, there was this representation of a Native American, and I believe it was a woman, and she was, or no, it was a guy, and he was just like crying, looking at all the trash. So it's like, it's just that would be wrong to just represent, an entire people, boiling it down to just like one or two traits. That would be stereotyping. Of course, just like any other racial group, there are major differences, highs and lows, goods and bads with any group of people. So what her goal was is to try to show other sides rather than just what the stereotypical version of a Native American might be. So she noticed that there was misrepresentation in children's books, and she worked throughout her writing career to portray American Indians realistically. It's a big key word right there, realistically. The good, the bad, the ugly, the beautiful. In 2000, President Bill Clinton awarded Snev with a National Humanities Medal. Sounds pretty good. Sounds like something you'd want to win if you were an author. All right, so let's oh, look at this. We could look at the standards that you'll be you'll be covering in this short story. Lots of them. Let me handle that. Let me handle that. That would be very boring, right? If we went through, you may be sitting in your seat saying, "This is boring already." Well, I think it would be more boring if we went over all the standards. So the next thing I would like to do, because how do I get to it? Because you will be, yeah, there will be some questions. Come on, what's there will be some questions that you'll be asked Comprehension questions. Oh, this is not good. And you can see me fumbling through this stuff here. All right. Boom. Oh, maybe we can't. Yeah, see, why wouldn't it go down? I want it to go down there. This online text is buggy as all get out, I would say. What we got? About seven? Five. Oh, five. Five questions. So we've never read the story. I would assume you've never read this story. So you might be wondering why are we looking at the questions already? It's a good way to preview the story. So you know what you'll be asked about at the end. Comprehension questions. What do you remember? So the first one, what makes grandpa sound glamorous to the narrator's friends? Okay. What happens when grandpa arrives at Martin's house? All of this is like right towards the beginning, within the first maybe page or two. And if you remember, this is about 9 pages. I mentioned that in class yesterday, about 9 pages. Why does grandpa want Martin to have the medicine bag? It's called medicine bag. As you're reading, hopefully anytime the medicine bag will be mentioned, you're like, ooh, I should take a note of that. What is in the medicine bag? Number 4 here. And what does Martin add to it at the end of the story? So if we're talking yesterday about symbolism, and I mentioned in that lesson, there's something inside that medicine bag that could be symbolic. We're talking about milestones. And the end. Write a 3-sentence summary of the medicine bag. 3 sentences. Not too bad. Remember, for hopefully you've already done this, but for red roses, you were asked to write a paragraph or 2. So a little bit shorter summary, and the story is actually longer. So what do you know? How are we doing on time? 12 minutes. Don't want to make this too long. All right. And you may be saying, oh, it's too long already. Hang on. This is 19 minutes and 30 seconds. If you remember Red Apples, it said it would take about 3 minutes to read. And I ended up talking about 20 minutes with that story. So this will definitely be a couple different parts. But what I want to do is hide this. We've seen this enough, right? The picture here. Boom, hide that. So now we're just down to the story. And one thing I always like doing is just kind of skimming through, like, whoa, how many? Whoa, 79 paragraphs. How many were in Red Apples? I think it was like 13 or something like that, right? So this is quite a bit longer. What is this? Ah, look at that. So they do have some, we would call these footnotes. So when there's a little extra explanation, if you look on the page, it's right at the bottom of the page, and we might say that's at the foot of the page, at the bottom of the page. Usually the top is called the header, like there's something up high on the page, we would call that the header. But just like a person, head at the top, feet at the bottom. Let's go. Grandpa wasn't tall and stately like TV Indians. His hair wasn't in braids. It hung in stringy gray strands on his neck, and he was old. He was my great grandfather, and he didn't live in a teepee. And if you look, wait, what's a teepee? Maybe you've heard of a teepee right there. Cone shaped tent, traditionally made of animal skins or bark. He didn't live in a teepee, though. He lived all by himself in a part log, part tar paper shack on the Rosebud Reservation in South Dakota. Now, if that sounds familiar to you, it should, because that is where the author grew up. So that's why sometimes it is important to do a little bit of research on the author. We had it right there. We didn't have to go too far. My kid sister Cheryl and I always bragged about our Lakota grandpa. Dakota. We know this, right? Already we've talked about that. It's a Native American tribe right there. Joe Iron Shell. Our friends who had always lived in the city and only knew about Indians from movies and TV were impressed by our stories. Maybe we exaggerated and made Grandpa and the reservation sound glamorous. But when we returned home to Iowa after our yearly summer visit to Grandpa, we always had some exciting tall tale to tell. So maybe they embellished a little bit. And you'll hear me say this quite a bit. In your own writing, when you're doing your narratives a little bit later, it's okay to embellish. I'm not saying lie, but if the story is just okay, you could make it a little better by adding some details to make it just that much more exciting. I'll never know. The reader will never know. People do it all the time. And that's what they were doing. They'd get back home telling some tall tales, maybe. Number three, paragraph number three. We usually had some authentic Lakota article to show our listeners, so the people they're talking to. One year, Cheryl had new moccasins. We know what moccasins are, right? They're pretty much like slippers, soft shoes, it says, that Grandpa had made. On another visit, he gave me a small, round, flat, rawhide drum decorated with a painting of a warrior riding a horse. He taught me a Lakota chant to sing while I beat the drum with a leather covered stick that had a feather on the end. Man, that really made an impression. So they were definitely proud of their Lakota heritage, bring it back to their classmates, maybe people in the neighborhood. So there was this distant land with some tall tales. That may come back to bite them here. We never showed our friend Grandpa's picture. Not that we were ashamed of him, but because we knew that the glamorous tales we told didn't go with the real thing. Our friends would have laughed. So when Grandpa came to visit us, I was so ashamed and embarrassed I could have died. So they would always go out to visit him. They live in Iowa. He lived in South Dakota, right? It was South Dakota, not North Dakota. Yep, South Dakota. Tables are going to turn. He is going to visit them unannounced. Unannounced. So you can imagine this old man, like, how the heck did you get here? Great grandfather. I mean, did he drive? I don't know. Did he fly in a plane? Either way, it's going to take a lot out of him I think, to get from South Dakota to Iowa. To us younger people, even though I'm 45, it's like, you're going to be tired after the journey. But number five, there are a lot of yippy poodles and other fancy little dogs in our neighborhood, but they usually barked singly at the mailman from the safety of their own yards. Now it sounded as if a whole pack of mutts were barking together in one place. I walked to the curb to see what the commotion was. About a block away, I saw a crowd of little kids yelling, with the dogs yipping and growling around someone who was walking down the middle of the street. Did the man walk? Did he walk all the way from South Dakota? I watched the group as it slowly came closer and saw that in the center of the strange procession, it's like a parade procession, was a man wearing a tall black hat. He'd pause now and then to peer at something in his hand and then at the houses on either side of the street. I felt cold and hot at the same time. I recognized the man. Oh no, I whispered. It's Grandpa. So you can imagine he probably has the address. Who knows? Is this before? He's looking on a piece of paper. So it's not like he's using Google Maps or anything like that. So the guy has, who knows? We'll find out. Has he walked? I'm not sure. But we are at almost 20 minutes. It's about 18 minutes and 45 seconds. So that might be enough for today, but just a little, hopefully a little tease. Hopefully you are excited to read more about this medicine bag story. But remember, as I always say, when you're first starting to get to know the characters, it's not quite exposition. We've talked about that because we're actually seeing it. Some of the exposition there, though, like we never saw that drum. We only heard about that drum being given. So maybe that drum is symbolic, of the Lakota tribe. But we will get more into the story, and I hope you like it as we keep reading. All right, that's enough for today.